Hi, welcome to another podcast from the Messed Up Counsellor, Ian Wallace. Um, if you like the podcast and you want to share and like it for other people, the reason why I say that is because we don't sometimes understand why other people would need what I'm talking about or to understand what I'm talking about. They might not tell you and they might not share that with you. So even if you don't know somebody's going through something, then it's a good idea to share things just in case that message, that information can get to them. Today, what I want to look at is thinking and consequences, which seems a strange title. Is it me or you or us? When relationships break down, because people naturally have different ways of viewing things, and some of that I've referred to in previous podcasts. The process of change, how we move, how we alter our worlds, our lives, our thinking, our understanding, means that two people in a relationship sometimes grow apart, if you like. The reason why they grow apart is not necessarily because they don't like each other. They might just have different ideas, views. They may have changed their world, their life, their thinking, and the other person hasn't moved with that or changed with that. Because we don't necessarily tell everybody around us what we're doing, what we're thinking, what processes we're going through, that communication kind of void, if you like, means that one person will change and will go through a process and the other person would be oblivious to it. They just think, well, this person's the same as they were previously. Certainly, when people engage with the counselling training, we change an awful lot in our worlds, and people who are therapists, counsellors will understand that. Our ideas change, our views change, our ways of looking at the world massively change because we have to make ourselves aware of everybody's world in a sense. So, because we're changing through that process, then our partners, our relationship partners, people around us, friends, even family, they may not necessarily see that change on a day-to-day basis. So when we meet again, we connect again in some way, shape or form, then the process of engaging will be different. So they may see a different us, a different person, because what we liked, what we tolerated, what we were okay with before, might now be different. So that process of consequences and thinking, we grow, we develop, we become, all of us, not just counsellors. I suppose counsellors probably do it much faster than other people over a shorter period of time. But we grow and we develop and we become us. But the other people around us, we kind of like lose, we kind of like disconnect over usually a period of time. It's not usually one day, 1 week, 1 month. It's a drip effect sometimes. So the consequences of change, to keep that person on board, keep them aware of what we're doing, where we are, how we're moving, how we're changing, how we're altering, is one where we need to have conversations. We need to explore with them why we're thinking differently, what we're thinking differently. I certainly do not laugh at comedy situations that I would have laughed at before I started training as a counsellor. I just won't do that now. Now, if I hadn't seen somebody for a period of time and that change had occurred in me, and then when we met again and there was some kind of comedy aspect happening, then they may be quite surprised that I no longer find that funny. And that might depend on their process, their world, their belief systems. They might find that really not something that they can tolerate, they can be around. We can't have that thing in common anymore. So we move and we change and we alter. They stay the same in some senses in that respect. And then we find this void, this process that we don't connect anymore. And with relationships, that breaks down over a period of time, as I've said. And that's sometimes hard to get back, depending on what the change has been and how they look at the world. Because the thing that used to connect us is no longer there, whether that's having some kind of humour, comedy aspect as a connection. So that piece is gone. And where do we share that? Where do we connect that again? If we've moved to a point where we can't go backwards, they can't go forwards to us. So there's this void, this separation process. And I think that happens with a lot of things over a period of time. And certainly with the relationship issues I see in the counselling room, it's more about that person hasn't communicated those changes to the other person and vice versa. It's not a one-way street. So they come out of that and they find that they don't know this person anymore. Standard process that people would kind of see that with is what they used to call empty nest syndrome, and possibly all still do. So the relationship is looking after family, career, money, commitments, standard of living, whatever it is. And the energy that we've got is in that. But then all those things move, change, alter. Kids leave home, as they should. And then the two, mum and dad, the partners, have this void. And they don't know each other. They maybe haven't spent time as a couple over a long period of time. And so there's, who is this person I'm living with? Same might happen when people retire, for example. So that retirement takes away a whole range of things that we may or may not have filled our life with. Other conversations, other people, other commitments, responsibilities, roles. Possibly that hierarchy of how you see yourself if you're in a managerial position or a directorship position. Those kind of processes will have changed. And that makes it hard to fill that void, fill that process. So there's lots of ways that couples, people, family members change, individuals. If we're having a constant dialogue about those changes, how we're dealing with it or not, as the case may be, with the people around us, then less likely they won't know us. They will be able to connect with us. They'll understand us a bit more. So the more conversation, the more communication that you can have will help that process. When we get to that point where there's something missing, there's a void between the two people, then that's much harder to put back because it's such a big gap sometimes that I just don't know this person anymore. I can't connect to them. The things we had, the values we had, are not the same. And sometimes those things are important to us. So in that world of consequences, it's not one person usually. One person might blame it on the other person. You're no longer the person I know or I knew. But the communication breakdown is about both people, not one or the other. And so that disconnection has been in some ways from both people. And that process means that both people would need to change, alter, become, adapt, negotiate, compromise, whatever you want to call that, in order to try and get that back. And in our world, in the counselling and therapy world, that's a lot of the time when we're working with couples, certainly, and families, is to reconnect that communication, understand each other again, work with each other again, and get to know each other again. And those voids, those splits, certainly within families, could have been a disconnection over many years. We find that a lot where maybe there's been an emotional trauma or an impact on one of the members of the family. Say somebody had died in the family who was one of the pivotal members of the family. And grief is a really hard one because we don't normally talk about grief and how we share that grief. So those processes of differences of how we work that grief process could be massively misunderstood. So you might get somebody who is quite logically minded, and they may go, well, okay, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to do the other. But might not think about feelings and emotions. Well, you might get somebody that's actually more feelings and emotions. Well, are you not bothered about this person that's passed? Are you not bothered about me mum, me dad, me brother, me sister, me aunt, me uncle, whoever it might be, me friend? And it's not that they're not bothered, it's just that we don't necessarily able to have that communication, that conversation, to understand each other's position. So that might cause a rift, and that might cause a rift that stands over a long period of time sometimes. And it would be very hard sometimes to get that connection back because of the big, big difference in the way that those people experience their worlds. So the consequences of not talking, not sharing, not communicating on a regular basis about our drives, our feelings, our emotions, our view of the world creates this distance. And as we work that in the counselling room, it's always about communication, about trying to get each person to understand the other person's position, point of view. That might not change anything. That might still not help in the process. But at least it might help them understand each other. And if we can do that, then chances are we've got a chance of it being something better, something more positive. That doesn't always work, as I've said. But the process of working that, process of reconnecting, communication, helps. Daily life sometimes can do that. You might have a situation where you've got one member of a relationship changing their job, their role, their function, their career. Not necessarily in counselling, where you might get somebody that is now working away from home, for example, and they were always at home. So the couple, the partners, the people connected to them would have to get used to that, them not being there. Maybe some of the roles, responsibilities they had, they're not able to do because not physically there. So there has to be a change. Now, a lot of times we don't talk about that before it happens. We don't have that conversation. We don't preempt what might or might not happen. We don't discuss that. We get on with our life. If we don't have those conversations of how this change is going to affect all of us, then we walk into it blind. We don't have preventative processes. We don't have considerations. We don't have fallback positions. We don't have ways of overcoming things. We just move through it. And that process of working away from home and less connection hasn't been taught, understood, shared. Fears, worries, concerns haven't been voiced. So we get into that process and then we find ourselves in different places, literally. And not knowing how we're going to overcome that as a couple, as a relationship partner. That's really hard, because by the time you get into that, with all the excitement maybe of having a promotion, new job, more money, then those are the positives, if you like, the exhilaration of it. But then we move into that, well, it's happened now, so where are we? Well, in completely different places. I didn't realise that being away from home would be so boring, would be so time-consuming, would be working 24/7, possibly. And the other person might say, well, I didn't realise that not having you around meant that I couldn't get this done or that done, or I would be worried about you or concerned about you, or the kids wouldn't have that person here on a night to tell them bedtime stories. A whole range of things might have changed from that one change of getting promotion. So prior to anything happening, we really, really should have conversations. We should have connections. We should have what ifs, consequences of the process. Don't allow it to just happen without those conversations, because that's a minefield. That is usually going to go wrong in some way, shape, or form. So it's about sharing, it's about putting your head into places, having a conversation about things before they happen, prior to the change. And then, hopefully, together, you can overcome it. But a lot of the time we don't. A lot of the time we stumble through life, so to speak. We react in the day-to-day processes. We don't preempt things. We don't have conversations before things happen. We find that a lot within counselling sometimes when people have got married, got engaged, lived together, that they don't think about what happens next. And it's not unusual for a couple to come to us 3, 4, 5, 6 months after they've been married and find that this new experience has been not helpful, not happy, not as a joyous an experience as they thought it was going to be. Because we think what it will be like. We kind of try to imagine what it will be like. But we both do it separately. We don't do it together. So we have this unrealistic expectation, possibly, of what that next step is going to look like. And they'll come into the counselling room and they'll say things like, well, we really don't know where we are. We don't know what's going on. We don't know each other because of those changes, because of those processes happening. So if you can preempt that, if you can have a conversation before you take action, before you make decisions, before you look at change, then you're more likely to be able to work that change. So don't think, talk. Don't have unrealistic consequences. Try and check things out before you do them. Try and check out what it will really look like before you do them. And then you might walk into that process, experience that process in a much more down-to-earth, much more realistic way. And if you have fears, worries, concerns about somebody changing, about things being different, don't hide them. Don't keep them inside you. Talk about them. That might dispel some of the excitement that the other person's going to have in that promotion, in the job process, that example that I've said. But that aspect of the fears, worries and concerns, if they're not voiced, will only amplify. And the other person won't be aware of those fears, worries and concerns, so they're more likely to think you're trying to get at them. So it's about having that shared process of communication, having that shared process of what is going to happen when. What do you think that will look like? What do you think will change? How do you think it will change? Are we doing this together, this change? Or are we doing it separately? And those consequences of those decisions are much easier to navigate if both people are involved in the process, involved in the decision, and also involved in the construction of those fears, worries, concerns, those what-ifs. Hopefully that helped and made sense of some of these natural things that happen to all of us. And it gave you some idea of what might be a more helpful, a more proactive way of dealing with it. My name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Enjoy.